as we gear up for the 2026 election, which is shaping up to be one of the most important election years we've ever had. I feel like we say that every election cycle, and it seems like we are always having to trump ourselves, pun intended, there. This election will really help decide whether or not we can put a check on Donald Trump and his administration, as well as Congress, because right now there are no checks and balances going on in Washington, D.C. And so, we'll talk about a mix of victories, challenges, and opportunities here tonight. And so, I'll start by reviewing the current policies that, we're working on in Lansing, from clean energy, water protection to waste reform and environmental justice. We'll then look at some federal action and administrative updates and national decision making. And then I'll talk a little bit about some major victories and challenges, and both policy and political. And then, we'll finally shift gears to look ahead to some potential ballot initiatives, races to potentially watch for in the political landscape as we head into 2026. So I'm going to start out here with state and federal policy. Uh, so at the Sierra Club, our mission is simple yet a powerful one. It is to explore, enjoy, and protect our planet. We do this by promoting the responsible resource use, educating and mobilizing people, and using every lawful means to defend our environment. And our policy work is really guided by this mission. We choose our priorities that have the biggest impact on protecting air, water, and our wild places. And we don't just fight against bad policies, we fight for something, a vision of a Michigan, that runs on clean energy, where water is a human right, and where every community has a voice. And so our policy agenda is really built around, six core pillars, and that is, clean energy for all, water protection, wildlands and wildlife, waste and toxins, environmental justice, and democracy. So I'm going to first start out with clean energy, because this is also really the foundation of, everything that we are fighting for. And in Michigan, for too long, our energy system has been controlled by a handful of monopoly utilities, DTE and Consumers Energy, who profit by keeping us hooked to their motives. That's left us and their bottom line. And so, that has left us with some of the highest electricity rates in the Midwest, for some of the worst reliability. And for far too many, people are struggling with power outages and rate hikes. And so decades of fossil fuel dependence have also polluted Michigan's air and water. And even the time of Donald Trump, and the lack of federal leadership, it's time for real climate action and not false solutions here at the state level. And so, we're pushing for policies that really give people more control and to make clean energy accessible to everyone. And so some of those policies, and for all of you who may have been at our May lobby day and we're lobbying with community solar, is going to be no secret to you. Community solar, these bills would finally allow Michigan residents, schools, local governments to subscribe to shared solar projects, even if they can't put panels on their own roof. So this means renters, low-income households, rural residents can all participate, places of worship could all participate in a community solar project. This could help save money by investing in local solar. It's exactly what it sounds like. This is community owned, community powered, and community say and community bought in projects. And these are usually smaller projects than the utility scale solar. And right now we don't have an enabling statute in law that allows for community solar in our investor utility territories. And what these bills would do would create that framework for us to do it. And 40 states have already have community solar policies. The next piece is also defending the clean energy law. There has been bills that have been introduced in the state house by the Republicans that have passed out of the House already. And these bills start to roll back our clean energy package we passed last year. Some of these bills roll back our renewable energy siting laws, as well as policies that would exempt gas plants in the Upper Peninsula from our clean energy standard. And so what they're trying to do is death by a thousand cuts. Takes one small piece at a time, at a time, at a time to really start unraveling the policy. And so we are having to spend our time at the Capitol defending against that. There's carbon capture and storage. Now, this is a controversial topic. This is about capturing carbon and injecting it underground. While it sounds climate friendly, it does raise huge questions about safety, long-term liability, and whether it locks us into fossil fuels further. And to be clear, at the Sierra Club, we're not rejecting this technology as a whole, but we are insisting on transparency, public oversight, environmental justice protections, water protections before moving forward with any policy. And the bills in the Senate right now that actually just passed out of the Senate are inadequate. Ratepayer Bill of Rights, this is about fairness. These bills would require the Public Service Commission to hold utilities accountable for poor service, make rate cases more transparent, insurance shutoff protections for customers. And I think, again, the bottom line here is that, our future, especially our energy future, should work for people, not just the shareholders of our utilities. Oh, okay, water. All right, water defines us. We sit atop 20% of the world's surface fresh water, and yet we all know it's threatened by pollution, climate impacts, outdated infrastructure, and also we pay some very high water utility bills in many communities across the state where it's just becoming unaffordable, like our energy. So some of the policies we are working on right now is around water affordability that would create a statewide affordability program, capping household water bills based on income, and ending shutoffs, and providing assistance for, repairs. This is modeled off a successful Detroit water affordability plan and would also make access to water a right and not a privilege. One of the other policy areas is a statewide septic code. And a fun fact that Michigan, even though we're surrounded by copious amounts of water, is the only state in the United States without a statewide septic system code. So that means over 1 million septic systems operate with no state oversight, and we are seeing raw sewage leaking into groundwater in our lakes, leading to algae blooms, E. coli issues, and other bacterial issues within our lakes and streams and rivers. And so this bill would create a statewide code and standards for inspection, maintenance, and repair while giving local health departments the support they need to enforce it. There's also some bad policy too around deregulating biodigesters that would, and what I mean by that is deregulating hazardous liquid waste from water quality permits. So it would exempt them from needing water quality permits and would give companies that spread liquid waste immunity from being held responsible for water pollution. So obviously a no-no. Shoreline hardening bills, this would remove Eagle oversight on hardening projects along our shorelines. It puts private property over public access, weakening Michigan's longstanding public trust protections, increases pollution by allowing plastic sandbags to be up indefinitely. Having such a policy without any sort of oversight, what we have seen along our shorelines is further erosion and the replacement of natural shorelines with hard walls. And so this is a policy we are currently pushing back on as well. Wildlands and wildlife. So obviously our wild places, our forests, our dunes and wetlands, I mean, defines Michigan, right? And they're also under increasing pressure from development, mining, and pollution. And some of the policies that we are working on right now and have been the past couple of sessions in particular is 30 by 30 to protect 30% of our land and water by 2030. Now, this is a national effort that the Sierra Club is leading on, and we are trying to create our own similar policy here in Michigan. And this policy would mean conserving critical habitats, restoring wetlands, expanding state parks, investing in tribal and community-led stewardship. And then another issue that I think many are familiar about is the Copperwood mine. There is a push right now during these state budget talks for a $50 million appropriation request for the Copperwood mine in the Upper Peninsula near Lake Superior and right on the footsteps of the Porcupine Mountains. We're fighting this because it, threatens our pristine water in Lake Superior, a wildlife areas, the Porcupine Mountains, and also is a project that provides very little in return to local communities, but major negative consequences to our unique public lands up in the UP. Another policy area that we are working on is around our recreation passport, which would automatically be included in vehicle registration. This kind of small change would dramatically boost funding for state parks, trails, and public lands and make access easier for everyone. And then pollinator health, we're actually working on this at the administrative level to limit the use of neonicotinoid pesticides, which are killing our bees and other pollinators that keep our ecosystems alive. And so I think the bottom line here too is that protecting our public lands and wildlife isn't just about scenery, it's about resilience, biodiversity, and also, our public lands provide that mental health for all of us and recreation. Waste and toxins. Michigan has some of the lowest landfill fees in the country, which is why you may have heard a lot of times about how we are the country's dumping ground for other states and Canada, and why you see so many landfills here. So while we have some of the lowest landfill fees, we're also dealing with toxics, contamination from PFAS still, microplastics, and pesticide pollution that threaten our health. And we're fighting to change that in a few different ways. We just introduced and had a hearing in the Senate around a microplastics bill package that we've been working on that aim to reduce microplastics at the source, monitor their presence in our drinking water, and would require the state to build long-term strategies to protect the public and the Great Lakes from microplastics. Solid and hazardous waste fee reform. As I mentioned, we charge some of the lowest dumping fees in the country, which encourages out-of-state waste. We have bills that passed out of the state Senate that would raise those fees and reinvest that revenue in recycling, cleanup, and pollution prevention programs. Extended producer responsibility, which is a forthcoming bill that we're working on. This would make companies responsible for the full life cycle of their products and their end use. This is the whole point of this is to create a circular market and more sustainable products. And many countries in Europe and Canada and many states have already adopted such a policy. And then again, administratively, pollinator protection. And environmental justice. This is where everything comes together, right? Environmental justice isn't just a side issue. It's the foundation of the environmental movement. The communities hit hardest by pollution, often communities of color, working class, low-income communities are also the ones who have had the least to say in decisions that affect them and are the ones who are bearing the biggest burden. And some of the policies that we are working on in this space is around cumulative impacts. This would require state agencies to actually have to evaluate the total pollution burden on a community before approving any new industrial permits. Right now, our regulators only look at one source at a time, a factory here, a refinery there, without considering how their pollution adds up cumulatively. And this bill changes that. Polluter pay. I know you've all heard about this too. Restoring Michigan's landmark polluter pay law, which was gutted in the 90s under Governor Engler. They would require companies that contaminate our land, air, and water to fully clean it up and not just contain it. And it would take the onus off the taxpayers from being held accountable for their mess. Ban on energy shutoffs and low-income heating assistance. No one should have to choose between paying the light bill and keeping food on the table. We have bills that would strengthen protections for low-income households and ensure utility assistance programs reach everyone who needs them. And then there's an air quality mitigation fund, which creates a dedicated fund for projects that improve air quality in overburdened communities. And at the end of the day, environmental justice is about fairness. It's also about power. It's about putting the decision making back in the hands of people who are most affected. Transportation. So let's finally talk about transportation because it is now that we've passed 100% clean energy bill, it has become Michigan's largest source of climate emissions and is one of our biggest opportunities for change in the state. We are the auto state, but our transportation system is still stuck in the past. It's car dependent, polluting, and inequitable. And we are working collaboratively with many different organizations from the environmental, clean energy space, clean transportation space, the public transit unions, public disability advocates around, reforming our Department of Transportation, that would, force them to assess greenhouse gas impact on major projects, state budget and advocacy. This is huge, ensuring that we are adequately funding our public transportation system. And this is a fight that we are going on right now with the state budget that I'm hoping we are going to be getting some good news about increased funding for public transit. Protecting fuel efficient drivers and expanding charging infrastructure. We've been imposing efforts to penalize fuel efficient drive vehicles with higher registration fees. And instead, I've been calling for more state investment in public charging stations for the state of Michigan. And then a policy that we are following closely because of its negative implications is a clean fuel and sustainable aviation fuel standard. This incentivizes alternative fuels like ethanol, biogas, hydrogen, polluting technologies that still pollute out of the tailpipe. But if you look at their life cycle emissions and from the pollution and emission impacts they have from the agriculture sector, it actually is providing a negative benefit. And so these are policies that, we've seen in California, Oregon, Washington, who have done this and working to ensure that if there is going to be a policy here in Michigan, that it is one that actually prioritizes electrification and not false fuel solutions. Democracy and good governance. All right, the fight for democracy and a livable planet and is interconnected. We can't achieve our policy wins. We cannot achieve our policy goals without a functioning democracy and giving people access to the ballot box that is, their right to have. And so this is an important foundational piece to all of our work. We don't achieve any of our water, clean energy, transportation, any of our goals without a functioning democracy and access to the ballot box, as well as transparency. So some of the things we are working on right now, we all know about the power of the utilities in our state. So we're working to get money out of politics, especially banning our utilities and other contractors from giving campaign contributions, increasing transparency of our state legislature by expanding the Freedom of Information Act to our legislature and executive offices, which actually they previously were not FOIAble. And then our legislative scorecard. So after each legislative session, our team dives into the voting records for each Michigan lawmaker, including committee votes. If you're ever wondering where your legislators are walking the talk, we've got the receipts. And you can find this online. It's public, it's transparent, and can be incredibly useful when talking with friends, lawmakers, neighbors, candidates. The scorecard isn't about partisanship. It's really about accountability and educating our members about who's fighting for our issues. This is also used to help guide endorsements and to, again, hold lawmakers accountable. And so if you haven't checked it out, I have a link there for our 2023-2024 scorecard. And again, it's live on our website and can be a great source. All right, federal policy. Now, while we are working to move Michigan forward and not backwards, we can't ignore what's happening nationally, right? At the federal level, the Trump administration continues to attack our clean air, water, climate, environmental justice protections. It's a daily fight. from attempts to weaken our Clean Air Act, rolling back clean energy standards and incentives to public land protections. You name it. There's too many things to name. And so our chapter's been working closely with National Sierra Club and other groups on federal resistance efforts. We're trying to get National Sierra Club more involved in this and take a bigger stance. So we need your voice in that. But a couple of things that the National Sierra Club is doing to keep people informed, and I encourage you all to participate in these if you can, is that every month they are hosting Sierra Club's National Action Hour, where our members across the country can get updates on new federal rollbacks, take action together, and keeping you up to date on what is going on. We in the state have also partnered with the Michigan Environmental Council and the Michigan League of Conservation Voters on a host of webinar series that we are hosting every other month. It's called Flood Proof, breaking down what these rollbacks and the actions that are going on at the federal level and what they mean for Michigan and how we can fight back there. So some major policy efforts that we were working on and a couple victories, because there are some good things and challenges. So let's take a step back and look at the big picture here. A major policy effort that we are working on right now, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily a policy effort, but the Campbell coal plant, the Trump administration has issued another extension under their emergency order for energy to keep the expensive, unnecessary, pollution-causing J.H. Campbell coal plant in the Michigan's west side to operate longer. Beyond the original 90 days, they extended it for another 90 days. We are fighting this. Our environmental law program is really on the front lines of this right now. Some victories. I mean, as you all know, we passed our 100% clean energy law. We've also worked to advance landmark water affordability funding within the budget process. We're working to move legislation. We're closer than ever to getting a statewide septic code through. And on the legal front, again, we are successfully holding polluters accountable in Michigan. One of our greatest challenges, obviously, the unprecedented time we are in and the new political reality we are in is creating challenges for how we engage and what that looks like, especially in the age of the fear tactics, intimidation, suppression, criticism, violence that is being used by the federal government right now, and the federal administration is definitely creating a challenge for us, but obviously we are not going to stop. One of our biggest challenges out here in Michigan, and I know Fred mentioned it, to our goals around water, energy, rates, you name it, is data centers. This is one of the biggest emerging threats most people have now heard about. So, tech companies are racing to build massive data centers in Michigan. They're power and water hungry. They're driving up demand for electricity. They're giving utilities new excuses to build new gas plants, keep coal plants on longer, and really disrupting our clean energy goals. And what we need to be vigilant about here in the state of Michigan, especially in the absence of federal leadership and state leadership at the local level here, with all of your voices, to ensure that we are having strong environmental reviews, energy efficiency requirements, public transparency, water transparency, water conservation measures are all being applied and required and demanded of these companies. And I think one other challenge here is obviously, and will always be until we start reining in the money in politics, is the corporate influence that is so out there publicly now on our state legislature. And so, the fight continues, but, the movement we're building in this room, across the state, every local group is growing. Our political landscape in 2026. So we have some potential policy measures in terms of ballot initiatives that it sounds like you all will be getting some more information about. So I will, for the sake of time, kind of just briefly run through these. There's a handful of ballot initiatives being circulated right now for signature. I would say the one we are definitely the most interested in, put a ban on utility contributions to candidates, as well as any contractor that gets over $250,000 in contracts from the state. There's some other ones that I know members are interested in. It's about the ranked choice voting amendment, also the fair share surcharge that would put a surcharge on taxable income of folks who have more than 1 million in joint returns and would put that towards local schools. And then there's some other controversial ones about citizen requirement, provide that only US citizens can vote in elections. Well, that can, I mean, that's already the law. Require voters to verify US citizenship during voter registration and require photo identification. These are some policy potential ballot initiatives being pushed on by the right. So let's talk about some of the races. As I mentioned, 2026 is going to be huge. We've got US Senator Gary Peters, who is retiring from the US Senate. And so we are going to have an open seat here, which is turning Michigan into one of the most competitive Senate races in the country because of that. You know, on the Democratic side, there are several candidates that have declared, including Rep. Haley Stevens, State Senator Mallory McMorrow, Abdul Al-Sayed on the Democratic side, former U.S. Congressman Mike Rogers on the Republican side, who ran and lost against Alyssa Slotkin last cycle. And there's a lot of polling that suggests this is going to be another tight contest with the outcome likely depending on turnout, candidate quality, and we'll see if any third-party dynamics, comes into play here. Statewide office, Governor Whitmer, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, Attorney General Dana Nessel, they are all term limited out. And so there are going to be open seats for the top of the ticket. And, these are key races and offices that help shape environmental policy. Now, the Attorney General and the Secretary of State, who ends up being the nominees for the Republicans and Democrats. Now that is all done and voted on at their state party conventions, but there will be, open primaries for the governor's race. And so there is already a slew of folks who have declared for governor, as you all may know, Jocelyn Benson, Garland Gilchrist, Chris Swanson, Mike Duggan, mayor of Detroit on the independent side, on the Republican side, Eric Nesbitt, John James, and also there's another slew of names for Attorney General and Secretary of State, which I won't go over just for the sake of time. U.S. House, all U.S. House seats are up in 2026. Some competitive races that we will be taking interest in, and I think a lot of folks will be, is to flip these seats, which is Congressional District 4 over on the west side, Congressional District 7, that's Tom Barrett, Congressional District 10, that's an open seat now that John James is running for governor. Representative Haley Stevens is vacating her seat to run for Senate, and so there will be a primary for, both Democratic and Republican sides. That is a safer Republican seat, though. There's a handful of candidates that have already declared for Congressional District 10 as well as Congressional District 7 against Tom Barrett, the incumbent. And so there's going to be more names. The filing deadline isn't until April, so we are way early here, but there are already people, throwing their hats into the race. And so every single House seat in the state House is up, all 110. Republicans currently have a 58-52 majority. Target, our goal here is to target incumbents and strong allies, facing competitors, to help provide early support, which can make a difference in campaign viability. There's a handful of open seats due to incumbents running for different offices in Metro Detroit and House District 6, 11, 15, 18, 22. We have some contested seats too. House District 48 with Jennifer Conlon, House District 54, Donnie Steele, who's now running for Senate, so that's open. House District 55 with Mark Tisdale, Reggie Miller, and House District 27, which is where Jamie Churches used to hold her seat. Michigan Senate, last cycle, the Senate wasn't up. This cycle in 26, all 38 seats are up. Democrats currently have a one-seat majority. 18 out of those 38 senators are ineligible to run in 2026 due to the new term limiting law that we passed in 2024. So 8 Democrats and 10 Republicans are ineligible. New court-approved Senate maps for 2026 is kind of adding some uncertainty and can rebalance several districts. And so we're all kind of reassessing what those leans are and what those competitive districts are and are looking to invest accordingly. And then I will say, though, there's a special election in Senate District 35 that will be taking place this spring. And then Senate District 30 is looking to be a contested one. And same with Senate District 13 with Senator Rosemary Bayer leaving and not running for reelection. So, political landscape and dynamics to watch. Many incumbents haven't yet officially declared whether they'll seek an election. Some may also drop out. Candidate filing deadlines aren't until April. Redistricting may shift the competitiveness of districts. You know, Contested really means in practice at least two credible candidates. We are a swing state. And so that means turnout will matter more than ever. And the kind of suburban rural dynamics that are here in Michigan. We are going to be highly targeted. There's going to be a lot of money spending. There's a lot at play, not only for what the makeup will be of our state legislature and our executive offices, but also with these open seats in the Senate, as well as competitive seats in the U.S. House, with such a slim majority Republicans have, a majority for Democrats in Congress for the House runs through Michigan. So there's going to be a lot of money spending going on here in 2026. Advocating and how to get involved. So this is where each of you comes in. Everything I've talked about tonight, every bill, every campaign, every fight, really depends on people power. And, we need your help here, whether it's at the federal level, the state level. We need you all to make calls, help meet with legislators, help plan events, attend events, volunteer for pro-environment candidates coming here in 2026. If you love knocking doors, we will have you covered. If you love data organizing or storytelling, we will have a place for you there too. The point is, you have a role to play, and together we can keep pushing for the Michigan we believe in. And so, you know, Fred mentioned, the climate action team. Jane mentioned our political committee and the important work that they do, the SEMG political committee, as well as our state political committee. There's our conservation committees, our executive committees, legislative committees. And so a lot of the things we are looking to get people further involved in is joining our lobby days, attending meetings in district, attending coffee hours, emails, phone calls, submitting comments. Even in uncertain times, we can still advance things, especially at the state level. The state can really be that shield and backstop and protector against federal government action or inaction. And so talking with lawmakers, you all as constituents, carries more weight than my talking points do or me talking. And so getting involved in those various things and local groups and activities is incredibly important. I mentioned help us elect environmental champions here in 26. We are going to need you. We're going to be putting together a political plan. We are going to need folks to knock doors, phone bank, fundraise, get folks out the vote, get them educated, attend candidate forums, ask questions of lawmakers and candidates about our issues, get our issues out there on the campaign trail. There are many different ways to get involved in political engagement that can fit, everyone's needs. Community action, organize local cleanups, could be teach-ins, rallies, No Kings rally coming up on October 18th. Having your voice and going out there and making it heard through protesting and rallies is another powerful way. Attending town halls. These grassroots activities can connect the dots here. And so, and then of course, again, storytelling, we need more voices. Share your experiences on social media, write letters to the editor, talk to neighbors, go to local city council meetings. And if you're not sure where to start, reach out to our local Sierra Club leaders, reach out to me, reach out to Cecilia, our volunteer coordinator, and we can make sure to get you plugged in, because at the end of the day, our movement is powered by people, and that's our biggest advantage, especially against money. And so again, we need you all, whether that can be testifying, meeting with lawmakers, volunteering campaigns, showing up just at key moments and events. Your advocacy plays a big role. And so with that, I just want to say, thank you all sincerely, for being a part of, our organization and this work. You know, we have proven that we can win. We've passed landmark clean energy laws. We've defended water rights. We've built over the years a organization and movement in the Midwest. And the next 18 months leading into 2026, again, we'll determine whether Michigan keeps leading on climate or falls backwards. And so we need to keep going, stay focused, and let's protect the Michigan that we love and make sure the next generation inherits that cleaner, fair, more sustainable future. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Tim. I think we can take questions now for a few minutes if we have a little more time. I have one, and it's not a criticism of anything in any way. I just bought an EV car, full EV. I'm so excited. But we were talking about it, and one of the questions that came up in conversation is, how will they replace the gas tax?
Well, I think that's like the number one. I mean, that's like a big debate going on in Lansing right now. What that exact solution is, Jane, I mean, there's multiple policies that we can look at, and that they're looking, especially with this road funding debate going on right now, that one of the things they are looking at is like road usage charge, so vehicle miles traveled. So this like basing like your fee on how much you drive.
Which is what the gas tax does.
Yeah. And so there's, looking at vehicle weight-based fees. We know our big super trucks aren't paying their fair share, so increasing fees on that, increasing a diesel tax. There's also been discussions about like indexing gas tax to total fuel consumption, and as well as looking at other things like what we are hearing right now at the state capitol, increasing taxes, on marijuana to help pay and pick up, raising the corporate income tax, increasing taxes on online gambling and sports betting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like at the end of the day, like I think what we will eventually end up on, because it seems to be the most popular thing gaining traction in the country and across states, is some sort of a VMT, vehicle miles traveled type like fee. But I think that's not going to be the end all. There's going to be various different kind of revenue mechanisms that we are going to need to look at to fill in that gap. And so, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Charlie, go ahead.
Hi, Tim. How you doing?
Good.
So you talked about some really interesting things that folks can do at the local level, in-district lobbying and the like. As you talk to your colleagues around the country in the Sierra Club or maybe in other advocacy organizations, have you found a chapter or group that's a real benchmark in your opinion that really is doing a bang up job?
It's a great question. I think this is something that I think across the country all of our chapters are, I wouldn't say struggling with, but especially in the time and new reality we are in, is still what is that best avenue and path forward, and to get people engaged. And so I guess all the things that I am mentioning, I am, seeing, be replicated in our other chapters. And so I think what we are trying to build, especially amongst all of our chapters, is building that connection between our chapter and our local groups, ensuring that you all have the tools, resources to take ownership and really lead within your communities, whether that's at the local level, at the state level, and engaging with your state level, local elected officials, as well as your federal elected officials, as well as connecting our local groups and members with other like-minded organizations to build that coalition. I think what, like with the climate action team and that Fred is putting on, I think those are the things that